God for this beautiful day He's given us, that the snow didn't accumulate too much, that it got way up into the double digits today. So that's all things to be thankful for.
There's Tom.
Hi, Tom.
Oh, his sounds. There's.
Good to see you, buddy.
Hey, thank you. Thank you. Good to see you.
All right, we are ready to wrap up Joshua. Last 4 chapters. It probably won't take that long because a lot of the things that we're going to talk about, we've talked about before in Deuteronomy and Numbers. So I've included some of the old write-ups that we had from those other Old Testament books. So Joshua chapter 20, the cities of refuge, and we've talked about that before. The cities of refuge were established for people who accidentally killed somebody else.
Sorry. I come on. Go, yeah, okay.
She's got the giggles tonight. I don't know why. What's so funny about killing somebody
Accidentally. Usually.
That's what I mean, accidentally.
Yeah, usually you have it in mind what you're going to do.
Well, okay, so for example, you were chopping down a cherry tree like George Washington did.
Yeah, in the desert.
In the desert, yes. And it fell on somebody. That would be an accidental death.
I get that.
Okay, accidental murder. But the clans back then didn't think of it that way. They just thought, well, you killed somebody, so we're going to take revenge on you. And that was the law of the time, that you could take revenge on someone, and revenge wasn't limited either. That's why they instituted eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Because that law was to limit the revenge. So if you knocked out someone's tooth, they couldn't knock out all your teeth or kill you. They could just knock out one tooth. So the cities of refuge were established so people who accidentally killed somebody could go and run there and hide there. Okay? And they had to stay in that city until the high priest, at the time of the entrance into the city of refuge, died. Then they can go back home. I guess they thought maybe they would forget by then. Okay, so, and it was established in Deuteronomy chapter 19, and it was established by God through Moses. So that's the cities of refuge, and that's chapter 20. So when you get a chance, read the supplemental document, what were the cities of refuge in the Bible? Towns for Levites. We talked about this before too, where the Levites were the priests, and their total responsibility was to take care of God. Take care of the temple, the tents, everything that had to do with worship and sacrifice. So they weren't allowed to they weren't allowed to have farms or any other businesses that would take them away from God work. So in order for that to happen, they didn't get any allocation of land. So they had towns established for all the Levites in the different clans areas, and each of the 12 clans was supposed to give up land to the Levites, and they did that so people wouldn't have to travel that far to see a priest. Okay, Rich Wilker's coming up.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So verse 3, chapter 21. So as the Lord had commanded, the Israelites gave the Levites the following towns, with pasture lands out of their own inheritance. Now, they were allowed to have cattle and maybe sheep and other herd animals. They were allowed to have those because they don't really take up a lot of work, I suppose. Unless you're milking cows, milking 3,000 cows, then it would take a long time. And the land that they were given, the towns they were given, were usually right near the walls, which was supposed to be like the prime property. Verse 4. The first lot came out for the Kohathites. And verse 5, we're told that those were Kohath's descendants. Now, Kohath was Levi's second son. And remember, way back in Genesis, the Levites were the only clan of Hebrews that stuck up for Moses in the golden calf incident, when Aaron got crazy and they had they created the golden calf out of melted earrings and everything. Well, the Levites, they stood up alongside Moses and God, and they wiped out, I think, 3,000 people because of the sin. And at that time, God says, you will be my chosen people. You will be my priests. So we had the Aaronites, the descendants of Aaron, they're one group of priests. And then we had the Levites, who were the other group of priests. So verse 5, Kohath was the second son of Levi. Verse 6, the descendants of Gershon. Gershon was Levi's first son. And verse 7, descendants of Merari. He was Levi's third and last son. So think of it as two different groups of priests, the Levites and the Aaronites. And within the Levites, we have three different clans: Kohath, Gershon, and Merari. Okay, so that's where that came in. And that pretty much takes us, I think, through chapter 21. The Levites got their land. So we have the cities of refuge. We have the Levites get their allocation.
So this is basically telling us who got what and where they went.
Right.
Got it.
Yeah. And to us, it may not seem like a big deal. Okay, there's allocation of land. But to the Israelites, it was a huge deal. Because coming from Egypt and being slaves, they had nothing.
Right.
And now God gives them land. He gives them cities that already have buildings in them. He gives them vineyards and crops. So they struck the inheritance big. So that's why this is a big deal, and that's why it's in the Bible, telling us all the borders, the allocation of land. This was really special. Joshua 22. Eastern tribes return home. Now remember, the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, when they saw the land east of the Jordan as they were coming into the promised land, they said, we like this land. So Moses says, okay, you can have it, but first of all, you've got to cross the Jordan with the rest of the Israelites,
To help us.
help them fight, and then you guys can go home. So now it's time for them to go home. Like 7, 8, or maybe even 9 years after they first got to there, they could finally go home.
They
So
left their cattle on the other side, though.
they left their cattle, their wives, their kids,
Okay.
everything.
They just went to fight. Okay.
Right, everything was left on the other side.
Okay.
So Joshua gets all the guys together and says, basically, you guys have done what you promised to do. Moses made you promise, you did it, so now you can go back to your homes on the other side. But, he says, remember to keep the commandments of the Lord. And basically, he's briefly restating Deuteronomy 6. Okay. Deuteronomy 6 is where Moses told the Israelites they have to, what they have to do when they enter the promised land. Because once they enter the promised land, they're going to be rich, they're going to be well off, they're going to be well fed. And Moses and God were afraid that once they become well off, they're going to forget about God, as people usually do. So Deuteronomy 6, from Deuteronomy 6, we get the first paragraph of the Shema. And the Shema is the daily prayer that devout Jews pray twice a day. And that's in another supplement you have called the Shema. I think we should go to Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 4 through 9. And it's a good prayer to pray every day. Because basically it says that God is the only one. He's our one and only God. And we should love Him with our entire body, soul, and mind. And we should talk about Him when we're laying down. We should talk about Him when we're sitting up. We should talk about Him on the streets. Basically, it lays out that we need to do evangelism. So it's a prayer that the devout Jews pray twice a day. Verse 5, to love the Lord your God, to walk in obedience to Him, to keep His commands, to hold fast to Him, and to serve Him with all your heart and soul. Joshua says, you guys need to remember that when you go back home. So he said, return back to your homes and divide the plunder from your enemies and with your fellow Israelites. Just go home, you've done what you're supposed to do. So they're on their way home, and they decide to build an altar in verse 10. the Reubenites, Gadites, and half-tribe of Manasseh, they built an imposing altar there by the Jordan. We're not supposed to have any other altars, right? We're not supposed to worship other gods. So the other Israelites on the west side of the Jordan, they got scared because they knew when somebody of the Israelites does something that's against God's commands, he starts taking out on all the Israelites, right? Because God doesn't want it to infect everybody else. So when the other Israelites heard they were building an altar, they got scared. So the whole assembly of Israel gathered at Shiloh to go to war against them and find out, what in the world are you guys doing? So they get there, and in verse 17, they say, was not the sin of Peor enough for us? And the sin of Peor, that was when the Israelites began to worship Baal in the city of Peor in Numbers 25. And it was summarized in Numbers 25, verses 1 through 3. While Israel was staying in Shittim, the men began to indulge in sexual immorality with Moabite women, who invited them to the sacrifices to their gods. The people ate the sacrificial meal and bowed down before these gods. So Israel yoked themselves to Baal of Peor, and Lord's anger burned against them. So the Israelites on the west side come to the Israelites on the east side, and they say, what are you doing? Don't you remember when we hung out with those Moabite women and God, remember?
Yeah.
I think it was Phineas took the spear and drove it through one of the Moabite women, and one of the leaders went right through him, and that's when Phineas got promoted. So the east side Israelites say, no, the west side still says, if the land you possess is defiled, come over to the Lord's land where the Lord's tabernacle stands and share the land with us. They were so afraid that God would get upset with the east side Israelites that they said, leave your land. It's no good. You guys defiled it. Come live with us. So they were ready to give up part of their inheritance just to save the entire nation of Israel. So that was pretty outstanding. But do not rebel against the Lord or against us by building an altar for yourself, other than the altar for the Lord our God, because there can only be one central worshiping place, and that's currently at Shechem. Lost my place. Oh, well, I'll come to it. Other than the altar of your God. When Achan, son of Zerah, was unfaithful in regard to the devoted things, did not wrath come on the whole community of Israel? Okay, remember, think back. This was in Joshua 7. This was when they went to attack Ai, and God said, you can't take anything out.
Oh, that's right.
Remember, Achan found a fancy robe, he found a fancy mantle and some other stuff, and he took it back.
Right.
And God started to punish all the Israelites until they found out it was Achan that did it.
And
So
he
of
came
course,
forward.
He came forward like a good guy, but then of course his whole family got wiped out. Because that's the way they did things. Achan was unfaithful in regard to the devoted things. The devoted things are the things that should have been destroyed in the city, but they were not. Achan took them back out. So all of a sudden, the Reuben, Gad, and the half-tribe, they replied to the clans of the west. No, it's not what we're doing. We're not building an altar to worship God or to worship false gods. Verse 24. We did it for fear that someday your descendants might say to ours, what do you have to do with the Lord, the God of Israel? So they were worried that since they're on the east side of the Jordan, the ones on the west side would say, you're not living with us, so you can't be Israelites. They said, no, we built it as a memorial. So the Israelites on the west side believed them, and they went home, and all was good. Verse 28, and we said, if they ever say to us or to our descendants, we will answer, look at the replica of the Lord's altar. So it's only a copy, which our ancestors built. Not for burnt offerings and sacrifices, but only as a witness between us and you. So they built it as, think of this as only a statue of the big temple. Okay? So they didn't build it as a temple for sacrifices, only as a facsimile. So it's like when they went to the Field Museum, they got one of those little plastic replicas, they got
Yeah.
cranked out. So that's
Yeah.
all it was. Just a little replica. So they believed them, the West Siders believed the East Siders, and everybody went home, and everybody's happy.
Is this where you get the first east side, west side against each other?
Probably.
Yeah.
And it continues to this day. If you live on the wrong side of the tracks, people talk about you, they don't want to go there, and it's just the way life is, right? Unfortunately, people find so many different ways to divide people. When I was growing up, it was on the other side of the tracks. When we lived in De Pere, it was east and west De Pere.
It was the river,
It was the river. The
Yep.
river divided people.
the Fox River.
And it was so crazy. This one woman was saying she got so upset because her daughter married a guy from the west side, and she said she'll never see her daughter ever again because she lives on the west side now, not the east side. Ridiculous.
There's a bridge,
There's a bridge. There's a
quite a
bridge.
few
They
bridges.
didn't like to take it.
Yeah.
Crazy people. That's Green Bay for you. All right, Joshua 23. So far, any questions on these first 3 chapters? There's a lot of thought there. There's a lot of content, but not a lot of things to talk about, I think. Anything stands out in chapters 20, 21, or 22 yet? Yeah, I didn't think so either.
Okay.
All right, Joshua 23. Joshua's farewell to the leaders. So this is another way that Joshua mirrors Moses. Remember, Moses had a farewell message to the Israelites, except Moses' farewell lasted quite a long time. And we got Moses' song out of that. Verse 1. After a long time had passed, and the Lord had given Israel rest from all their enemies around them, Joshua, by then a very old man, summoned all of Israel, their
110.
elders, leaders. And it kind of shows you how much God loved Moses. Because remember, when Moses died, he was 120 years old, 10 years older, and his eyes were clear, his vision was clear, he was strong, and God just decided to take him home. Because God said, I can't let you go into the promised land because of the mistake you made, so I'm just going to bring you to heaven. So here, Josh was 10 years younger, and he's a very old man. 110 years old. And he just wants to remind the people. In verse 3, you yourselves have seen everything the Lord your God has done for all these nations for your sake. Wiped out everybody. It was the Lord your God who fought for you. Remember now I have allotted as an inheritance for your tribes all the land of the nations that remain. The nations I conquered. Well, he made a mistake there. God conquered them. So we need to circle that. Joshua didn't do it. God did it. The Lord your God himself will push them out for your sake. He will drive them out before you, and you will take possession of their land as the Lord your God has promised. And now he lays down the rules for them. Be very strong. Be careful to obey all that is written in the book of the law of Moses. So he's talking about the first 5 books of the Bible. Okay? Without turning aside to the right or to the left. Do not associate with these nations that remain among you. Do not invoke the names of their gods or swear by them. You must not serve them or bow down to them. You are to hold fast to the Lord your God as you have until now. So Joshua was really familiar with all the weak spots of the Israelites from the time he spent in the desert with the first generation. So he's telling them that you have to obey all that is written in Torah, the first 5 books. You can't make additions or subtractions to it. You got to do every word. Number 2, don't associate with the Canaanites that remain among you, and don't intermarry. That's the problem with the Moabite women that they had. And do not worship the Canaanite gods. Verse 11, so be very careful to love the Lord your God. It's a great summary of what Joshua told the Israelites in verses 6 and 8. And then, like I said, unlike Moses, who's in great shape, Joshua was a very old man. So off he goes. And he tells them, if you don't intermarry with them, if you do intermarry with them, if you do ally them with yourselves, you will perish from this good land, and that's going to be it for you. Verse 14, now I am about to go the way of the earth. So he's basically saying he's dying, because we know that everything in earth dies. Crops, trees, people, animals, everything dies. Verse 16, if you violate the covenant of the Lord your God, which he commanded you, and go and serve other gods and bow down to them, the Lord's anger will burn against you, and you will quickly perish from the good land he has given you. He tells them, you need to behave, otherwise you're going to be gone. And we know what happens. They don't behave, and they have problems in Judges. They get taken over by the Babylonians, the Assyrians, because they didn't behave.
So who's in charge now?
No one's in charge right now.
Okay.
Okay, but once Joshua dies, they still need a leader, because otherwise they're going to run around crazy.
Right.
And that's where the judges come in.
Ah.
And that's the next book of the Bible, but we're going to skip over to Mark, because we want to do Old Testament, New Testament, back and forth.
Got it.
But think of judges as leaders in lieu of Moses and Joshua, because there's nobody that's that God has selected to replace Joshua. When Moses died, God selected Joshua to replace him. So there was a succession, but now there's nobody like that. Nobody good enough has risen up.
And who chose the judges?
God chooses the judges.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So it's an interesting book, and that's where we're going to see Samson. Samson's in the Judges. He's one of the judges. Fun book, but we're going to go to Mark first, and I think it's good because we're coming into Lent.
Mm-hmm.
It's perfect timing. Joshua 24, the covenant renewed at Shechem. Then Joshua assembled all the tribes of Israel at Shechem. So all the tribes come together, the east siders and the west siders, and are all in one place. Joshua said to all the people, this is what the Lord, your God, the God of Israel says. Long ago, your ancestors, and then he goes through the whole list. Terah, the father of Abraham and Nahor. He basically recaps history. So in verses 2 and forward, we go from the time of Abraham through Moses and Aaron, the Egyptians, how God took care of the chariots and the horsemen, drowned them in the Red Sea. He's kind of recapping for them